You finally got your shit together for 2 weeks. You were waking up on time, completing tasks, responding to messages, doing all the things that normal people do without thinking about it. And instead of feeling proud or relieved, or like you'd finally cracked the code, you felt terrified, felt like you were wearing someone else's skin, felt like this couldn't possibly last because you've never been the person who has their life together. And if you become that person, then who are you? What happens to the identity you've built around being chaotic and broken and barely surviving? And so your brain, that beautiful self-sabotaging disaster of neurons and dopamine deficiency, decided to protect you from the fear of success by ensuring you'd fail, by making you sleep through your alarm, by convincing you that one day off wouldn't hurt, by whispering that you were being too rigid and you deserved a break. And before you knew it, the 2 weeks of progress had evaporated and you were back in the chaos, back in the familiar hell of disappointment and self-hatred. And the worst part is you did it to yourself. You watched yourself do it. You knew while it was happening that you were sabotaging, but you couldn't stop because something in you, something deep and primal and scared, believes that staying broken is safer than risking the vulnerability of actually being okay. You've noticed the pattern, how every time you start building momentum, something inside you finds a way to destroy it, how you get close to finishing a project and then lose interest. How you develop good habits and then abandon them right when they're starting to stick. How you create systems that work and then stop using them for no reason you can articulate except that it started to feel too easy, too stable, too much like you were becoming someone you didn't recognize. You sabotage relationships right when they're getting serious. You quit jobs right when you're getting good at them. You destroy progress right when it's about to compound into something sustainable because sustainable feels dangerous. Feels like you're building a house on sand. Feels like the higher you climb, the harder you'll fall when the inevitable crash comes. And your ADHD brain, with its executive dysfunction and its novelty-seeking and its absolute terror of boredom, has learned that crashing on purpose at least gives you control over when the pain happens. At least lets you manage the disappointment by causing it yourself instead of waiting for life to cause it for you. You feel most comfortable in chaos because chaos is familiar. It's what you know, it's where you've lived your entire life. And as exhausting as it is, as much as you claim you want stability, there's a part of you that's addicted to the crisis, to the drama, to the adrenaline of barely making deadlines and scrambling to fix problems you created and living on the edge of disaster because at least when you're in crisis, you know what to do. You know how to survive, you know how to function in emergency mode, even if you don't know how to function in regular life. And stability? Actual boring, predictable stability that requires a completely different skill set that you've never developed because you've never had the luxury of practicing it. When you've been too busy putting out fires to ever experience what it's like to just exist, without a crisis demanding your attention. You start to improve and your nervous system panics because improvement means you might actually have to deal with the things you've been avoiding, the emotions you've been running from, the identity questions you've been postponing, the fear that if you're not broken, then what's your excuse, what's your story? How do you explain the years of failure if it turns out you were capable all along? And facing that possibility that maybe you could have done better sooner if only you'd tried harder or gotten help earlier. That guilt is unbearable, so your brain protects you from it by making sure you fail again. By proving that no, you really are broken. You really can't maintain progress. You really do need the chaos because without it, you'd have to confront the terrifying question of who you are when you're functioning. The brutal truth that's going to sting is that you're not just sabotaging because of ADHD symptoms, you're sabotaging because somewhere along the way, you built an identity around being the chaotic one, the struggling one, the one who can't get their shit together. And that identity became comfortable even though it's painful because at least it's predictable, at least it gives you a role, at least it means people don't expect too much from you, and if you suddenly start functioning like a normal person, then the expectations change. The forgiveness for your failures disappears. The accommodation and understanding you've received for being neurodivergent gets withdrawn. And now you're just another person who's supposed to have it together. And that pressure, that vulnerability, that exposure, it's too much, so you retreat back into dysfunction where at least you know the rules, where at least failure is expected, where at least you don't have to live up to the person you could be because you've already proven you're the person you've always been, and staying that person even though it hurts feels safer than becoming someone new, and discovering that even the better version of you still isn't good enough. You sink every time you improve, because improvement means change, and change means loss, and you have to grieve the chaotic version of yourself, even though that version was suffering. You have to let go of the identity that's been protecting you, even though it's also been destroying you. You have to risk being seen as capable, which means being held accountable, being expected to maintain the progress, being judged when you slip back instead of being accommodated because everyone knows you struggle. And your ADHD brain, with its rejection sensitivity and its fear of failure and its absolute certainty that everyone is waiting for you to prove you're a fraud, that brain would rather sabotage on purpose than risk the humiliation of trying your best and still failing. So it ensures you fail on your terms, at a time and place of your choosing, in a way that lets you maintain the narrative that you didn't really try. That you could have done it if you wanted to, but you just didn't want to. And that lie, that protective lie that you're not trying rather than trying and failing, that's the lie that keeps you stuck in the cycle of sabotage, because as long as you don't try, you never have to face the possibility that your best isn't good enough. You can start to break this pattern by first recognizing it, by naming it, by seeing that you do this, that it's not random, that there's a part of you that's scared of success and is actively working to prevent it. And once you see it, you can start to intervene, not by powering through or forcing yourself to maintain progress through sheer willpower, because willpower doesn't work with ADHD brains, but by addressing the underlying fear, by asking yourself what you're afraid will happen if you actually get your life together, what you'll lose, what will change, what expectations will increase, and then deciding if those fears are realistic, or if they're just the anxiety talking, if they're protecting you from real danger, or if they're protecting you from the imagined danger of being seen, being visible, being someone who has it together and therefore has no excuse when things go wrong. You can practice what I call sustainable imperfection, which is letting yourself build systems that are good enough instead of perfect, routines that work most of the time instead of all of the time, progress that's slow and messy instead of dramatic and impressive, because your ADHD brain handles gradual better than it handles intensity, handles low stakes better than it handles high stakes. And if you can remove the pressure of being perfect, then maybe you can maintain progress without your nervous system deciding that progress equals danger. You can create what I call failure protocols, which are plans for what you'll do when you start to slip, when you miss a day, when you break the streak, because you absolutely will mess up. And if you have a plan for how to get back on track instead of spiraling into self-hatred and giving up completely, then the slip doesn't have to become a collapse. The mistake doesn't have to become evidence that you're broken. It just becomes data, just becomes information about what doesn't work, so you can try something different instead of trying the same thing harder. You can practice identifying the warning signs of sabotage, the moment when you start to rationalize skipping something or postponing something, or telling yourself that you don't really need to do that thing that's been helping you. And when you catch that thought, you can pause and ask yourself if this is genuine flexibility, or if this is sabotage disguised as self-care, if you're really tired or if you're scared. If you really need a break, or if you need to push through the fear that success means you'll lose yourself. And sometimes the answer will be that you really do need rest, but sometimes the answer will be that you need to do the thing anyway, even though you don't want to, because not wanting to is part of the sabotage pattern. You don't have to become a different person to break the cycle. You just have to become someone who's aware of the cycle, who can see it happening and intervene before it destroys everything, who can catch yourself mid-sabotage and make a different choice. And those different choices, made consistently over time, they accumulate, they compound, they create a version of you who still has ADHD, who still struggles, who still has chaotic days and forgets things and loses motivation, but who doesn't sink completely every time progress appears, who has learned to tread water in the space between chaos and stability, who can function without needing to be perfect, who can improve without needing to maintain that improvement flawlessly forever. Because forever is too big a time frame for an ADHD brain. Forever is overwhelming. But today, just today, doing the thing today even though part of you wants to sabotage, that's manageable, that's possible. And if you can do it today, then tomorrow you can decide again. And the day after that you can decide again. And each decision is independent. Each day is a fresh start. And you don't have to maintain the streak. You just have to make the choice right now in this moment. And if you make the choice more often than you don't, even if it's 51% of the time instead of 100%, that's progress, that's improvement, that's breaking the pattern even if it doesn't look perfect or impressive, or like the transformation stories you see online where people completely change their lives overnight. Because overnight change doesn't work for ADHD brains. Overnight change triggers the sabotage, but gradual change, messy change that includes setbacks and failures and days when you sink a little, that change your brain can handle because it's realistic, because it's sustainable, because it doesn't require you to become someone you're not. It just requires you to become someone who sinks less often, who recovers faster, who can look at the pattern without judgment and say, I see you, I understand why you're doing this, you're trying to protect me, but I don't need protection from success. I need protection from the part of me that's convinced that staying broken is the only way to stay safe, and it's not staying broken is killing me slowly, and I'd rather risk the vulnerability of improving than guarantee the suffering of staying exactly where I am.